We turn now to that remarkable scientific breakthrough. 13,000 years after the last dire wolf walked the earth, scientists say they've now brought them back.
Scientists have questioned highly publicised claims that the dire wolf has been brought back from extinction.
Researchers have bred a trio of gray wolf pups that carry genes from the dire wolves, a species of giant canines that once roamed the earth.
New technology is allowing prospective parents to screen embryos for genetic conditions and even select eye color or sex. But is curating a designer baby going too far?
With a comeback some 13,000 years in the making, researchers have bred a trio of gray wolf pups that carry genes from the dire wolves, a species of giant canines that once roamed the earth. This is Jurassic Park meets Game of Thrones, as you said.
Yes, more than a year ago, Rebecca, you know this, I started talking to this group because they call themselves a de-extinction company, and that piqued my interest because they're promising to bring back the woolly mammoth by 2028. A few weeks ago, we signed NDAs and learned what they called their first big de-extinction success. As soon as we got on the call, they said, "Have you ever seen Game of Thrones? Because we brought back the direwolf."
Nymeria?
With their foreboding presence, all-knowing eyes, and undying loyalty, the direwolf was as much a part of Game of Thrones as the actors themselves. And this morning, Colossal Biosciences say that they have managed to bring these mythical creatures, who last roamed the Earth 10,000 years ago, back from extinction. They say it's the first time an extinct species has ever come back to life.
Scientists have predicted that by 2050, more than half of species that are alive today could become extinct. I don't want that future.
According to Beth Shapiro and her team, they extracted high-quality DNA from direwolf fossils and combined that with the genome of a gray wolf.
That animal looks like a direwolf, it will behave like a direwolf, and it is a direwolf.
Colossal's chief animal officer, Matt James, is in charge of taking care of the 3 white direwolves: Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi. Colossal is keeping the now 6-month-old direwolves at an undisclosed location on a 2,000-acre enclosed nature preserve.
The responsibility lies on me and my team in order to make sure that those animals live the best life possible, experience the most optimal welfare possible.
Dr. Robert Klitzman is a bioethicist and geneticist at Columbia University. And while excited about the idea of the direwolf,
and I mean, gee, that's impressive. There's a certain wow factor, like how cool is that, right?
he has concerns.
The bottom line is a lot of the genome we still do not understand. And so one wants to be careful if you're mucking around with genes that there may be things we don't understand. You may produce a wolf that's twice as ferocious.
After all, Jurassic Park, which explored the concept of bringing dinosaurs back from extinction, might have started like this. But it wound up like this. Hey! A cautionary tale for scientists.
Ecosystems are very delicately balanced, and nature is far more complicated than our ability as humans to understand it or to understand all the possible unforeseen consequences.
People think it's a scary word, de-extinction. They immediately put us with Jurassic Park, and it's not. We're trying to develop these new techniques in order to save animals.
But the process does sound like something out of the 1993 blockbuster.
It is.
The company says scientists relied on ancient preserved DNA from a tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull to decipher the direwolf genome. They then used gene editing technologies to rewrite the genetic code of the common gray wolf.
So one at a time, we take our gene editing tools and we go into that cell and we cut out the bit of DNA that looks like a gray wolf and paste in its place the DNA that looks like a direwolf.
Once a new genome was created, domestic dogs were used as surrogates, miraculously giving birth to Romulus, Remus, and their sister Khaleesi. Yes, named after Game of Thrones. But this scientific feat, no fantasy, and some online already questioning whether it's a step too far. Still, the technology is here, and scientists say it could shape the future of our ecosystem.
We produce something that is magnificent and science fiction at its finest.
They are also working on other animals, including the woolly mammoth and the dodo, guys.
Oh, they're working on the woolly mammoth. Okay, Liz, thank you.
Thank you. You excited about that?
No, I'm a little. For whatever reason, I'm fine with the wolves, the woolly mammoth.
Ever find yourself, like watching Game of Thrones or something, and those like amazing creatures, they have those extinct things kind of grab your attention?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, what if that fantasy kind of started to become real? That's what we're diving into today. A really fascinating story, the claim that Colossal Biosciences has brought the dire wolf back to life.
Yeah.
With 3 pups named Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi.
We've got this article here. Has the dire wolf come back to life? Here is what we know.
Okay.
And it's a really cool jumping off point, I think, to understand what exactly Colossal has done.
Right.
So our mission, I guess, today is to kind of explore what a dire wolf was, how these new pups fit into that picture.
Okay.
And really try to answer that question. Has the dire wolf really come back?
So to start off, let's break down exactly what we're talking about here, because for a lot of us, dire wolf, it's almost like a mythical beast,
Yeah.
But this article makes it clear that the dire wolf, Enos dirus, was a real predator, dominant predator in North America during the Ice Age.
It's pretty cool, too, that George R.R. Martin, who brought us Game of Thrones,
oh, wow,
is actually involved with Colossal as an investor and advisor.
Interesting.
He even talked about the, rich history of these animals and said Colossal is creating magic. So it's really cool to have him involved.
Yeah, it really kind of underscores that this wasn't just like a made-up creature.
No, not at all.
This was a real thing.
A real animal.
So what did this real animal look like?
Well, the fossil record gives us a pretty good idea.
Okay.
And the main thing to understand is that they were built for strength.
Okay.
They had more muscle and a heavier build than other wolves we see, both past and present. But it's important to remember, that doesn't mean they were slow or clumsy.
Oh, okay.
The evidence suggests that they were still quite capable and agile in their environment.
Gotcha. So not like a, big lumbering bear.
No, not at all.
But more like a...
Powerful athlete.
Okay.
Strong, but mobile.
And their diet, I'm assuming, reflected that power.
Absolutely.
They weren't going after, tiny little rabbits or anything?
No, they were preying on the large Ice Age animals. Things like bison horses, potentially even mammoths.
Wow. Okay.
So these were formidable creatures.
Yeah.
And the dire wolf's robust physique would have been, a big advantage in taking them down.
Which makes you wonder why they disappeared.
Right.
Like what happened?
Well, the article suggests that as their massive prey started to decline, potentially due to, environmental shifts or human hunting, the dire wolves faced increasing challenges.
Right. Makes sense.
And what's interesting is gray wolves, which probably arrived in their territory a bit later, seem better equipped to adapt to those new food sources.
Oh, that's interesting.
And eventually they kind of took over that ecological role.
So the dire wolf is kind of specialized?
You could say that.
And then as their very specialized food source went away, they weren't able to adapt.
Yeah, that's the leading explanation.
Yeah.
The decline of their main food source created an opportunity.
Yeah.
And the gray wolves, being more adaptable, were able to thrive.
It's so interesting how like one species can replace another just because of
ecological pressures.
Circumstance.
Yeah, it's a fascinating example of that.
So we've got this image of a really powerful Ice Age predator.
Yes.
And now this article points out something that I think is pretty surprising.
Okay.
Dire wolves weren't actually that closely related to gray wolves.
Yeah, this is really important to understand.
Okay.
So while they might share some similar features,
the
article mentions thicker legs, broader heads, the kind of stocky build.
Yeah, they look similar.
And a more pronounced snout. But their evolutionary paths actually diverged millions of years ago.
Wow.
So genetic research has confirmed this. They weren't ancestors of gray wolves.
Okay.
They were a separate branch on the evolutionary tree.
Interesting.
That developed independently here in the Americas.
So they looked similar. They kind of occupied a similar niche, but they weren't really genetically all that connected.
Exactly.
Which is really important, I think, to understand
what
Colossal Bioscience has actually done.
Yeah.
So how did they go about this revival, this bringing back this creature?
Well, the process is really a testament to how far genetic technology has come.
Okay.
So scientists at Colossal started by extracting and sequencing DNA from 2 incredibly old dire wolf specimens. A 13,000-year-old tooth.
Wow.
And a 72,000-year-old ear bone.
That's incredible.
And this gave them that blueprint, the genetic code of the dire wolf.
So from that, they could pinpoint the differences between the dire wolf
Right.
and its closest living relative, the gray wolf.
Exactly.
And the article mentioned they found about 20 key genetic differences.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound like a lot, but I imagine those differences are really important for determining, their traits.
That's exactly right. They weren't just random variations.
Yeah.
They specifically identified genes that were associated with those unique direwolf characteristics. So things like the larger size, the broader head, and potentially even thicker fur.
Okay.
So once they had this list of differences, they used CRISPR technology.
CRISPR, the gene editing tool we hear so much about these days.
That's the one.
How did they apply that in this situation?
So think of CRISPR like very precise molecular surgery.
Okay.
It allowed them to edit the genomes of gray wolf cells. So they went in and made those 20 targeted changes.
Wow.
And essentially altered the gray wolf DNA to incorporate those direwolf variations.
So they're taking the gray wolf's genetic code and making very precise adjustments based on that ancient DNA.
Exactly.
And so then after they've modified these cells, what happens next?
Well, that modified genetic material is then introduced into an egg cell from a domestic dog. And this is key to creating a viable embryo.
Gotcha.
Once the embryos start to grow, they're implanted into surrogate dogs. And those dogs carry the pregnancies to term.
And the article says that gestation is about 62 days for dogs.
Yeah, about 2 months.
So that brings us to the new arrivals, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi.
Yes, the pups.
What can you tell us about these three?
Well, Romulus and Remus are both males.
Okay.
And they were born on October 1st, 2024.
Okay.
Khaleesi is a female.
Okay.
And she was born on January 30th, 2025.
A little bit later.
Yeah.
So at about 6 months old, Romulus and Remus are already almost 4 feet long.
They're big.
And weigh about 80 pounds.
Yeah.
And they're projecting that they could reach 6 feet long and 150 pounds as adults.
Yeah, they're going to be large animals.
That's huge.
And Khaleesi, at 3 months, is showing similar progress.
Those are some big pups.
Yeah.
The article even quotes Colossal's chief animal officer.
Oh, yeah.
Who, when the first pup was born, said, "Good Lord, this thing is huge."
Right.
So that gives you a sense of their size. And physically, they seem to be showing some of those, characteristics that we expect from a dire wolf.
Right.
The white coat, the larger size, the broader heads.
It seems like those dire wolf genes are really expressing themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where the excitement and the debate comes in.
Because are these actually dire wolves?
Right.
Colossal Biosciences is using the term de-extincted.
Yeah, they are.
Which is a pretty bold statement.
It is.
But the article immediately points out that some experts consider these to be genetically modified gray wolves.
Yeah, so that's the real question here.
Yeah.
Is this de-extinction or is this just a modified gray wolf?
Yeah.
Ben Lamb, the CEO of Colossal, said, "We call them dire wolves."
Okay.
Which makes sense from their perspective.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really address the scientific complexity.
Right.
Lovedalen, a professor who specializes in evolutionary genomics,
Okay.
and is also an advisor to Colossal, by the way.
Wow. Okay, so he's got an inside view.
He does.
Okay.
And he said that if you look at the entire genetic makeup, these pups are 99.9% gray wolf.
Okay, so he's saying, they've got some dire wolf genes, but they're mostly gray wolf.
That's right. So how many genes do you need to change before you can call it a dire wolf?
Right.
He says it's a philosophical question.
There's no, set definition, I guess?
Not really.
Okay.
However, he also points out that these pups do carry dire wolf genes that make them look more like a dire wolf than anything we've seen in 13,000 years.
That's true.
And he called that very cool.
Yeah.
So even within Colossal,
Yeah.
they understand that this is complicated.
Right. It's not a simple yes or no answer.
Exactly.
It sounds like they created something that resembles a dire wolf in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But their heritage is still primarily gray wolf.
Their genetic heritage, yes.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating where that line is.
Yeah.
Between, science and definition.
Okay, so that brings us to the bigger picture.
Right.
What are the implications of this?
Well, the article talks about Colossal's goals.
Okay.
They want to advance genetic engineering.
Okay.
And develop tools for conservation,
Uh-huh.
especially for species that are facing genetic bottlenecks.
So it's not just about bringing back extinct animals just for the fun of it.
No, there's a bigger idea here.
Okay.
They're using the Dire Wolf Project as a demonstration of what this technology can do.
Yeah.
And Andrew Pask, another member of Colossal's advisory board, talks about the awesome potential for recreating lost genetic diversity and helping to stabilize ecosystems.
So the idea is you could strengthen populations of endangered animals.
Exactly.
By like introducing new genetic variations or even reintroducing extinct species.
Right. Potentially even bringing back species.
Wow.
To fill those missing roles.
But are people in the conservation community all on board with this?
Well, there are different perspectives.
Okay.
The article talks about how some are really excited about the possibilities.
Yeah.
Using this technology to combat biodiversity loss, but others are worried that it might take resources away from more immediate conservation strategies.
Like what kind of things?
Like habitat preservation.
Oh, right. Okay.
And combating the illegal wildlife trade.
So like protecting the animals we have now.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of focusing on bringing back ones that are already gone.
And Dan Ash from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums in Canada said it really well.
Okay.
He said we can't protect what we already have.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It's something to think about, especially since Colossal Biosciences has a lot of money behind it.
Yeah, how much are we talking?
They've got $435 million in investments.
Wow.
And a valuation of $10.2 billion.
So the question of how they're using that money is a big one?
It is a big one.
So what happens next?
Well, for Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, they're going to be monitored very closely.
Okay.
Their development, their health, their behavior.
Makes sense.
Just to see how those dire wolf genes are expressed over time. And Colossal also has other projects in mind.
Oh, really? Like what?
They're thinking about the woolly mammoth.
Wow.
So their long-term goal is to really improve this technology and use it for real-world conservation.
So we've learned a lot.
We have.
But let's go back to that original question.
Okay.
Have these pups truly brought back the dire wolf?
I think it's complicated.
Yeah.
Genetically, they're mostly gray wolf.
Right.
But they have those dire wolf genes that give them those physical characteristics.
Yeah.
Colossal calls it de-extinction.
Right.
But scientists are a bit more cautious.
Yeah, they're saying it's more like a modified gray wolf.
Yeah, with dire wolf traits.
It's really interesting how quickly science is changing.
It is.
And how our understanding has to change with it. It brings up so many questions about our relationship with nature and the power of this technology.
Exactly. And it leaves us with a question for you, the listener.
Okay.
What does de-extinction really mean? Is it about a perfect genetic copy?
Right.
Or is it about bringing back some of those key characteristics?
Yeah.
Even if the genes aren't exactly the same.
Really makes you think.
Just think what that means for conservation.
Yeah.
And for our understanding of life itself. This is a question that's going to keep evolving as this technology does.
Really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks for listening.
Of course.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.